Jonathan Hayes had always been a man of discipline, routine, and quiet ambition. For 30 years, he worked as a financial analyst in a mid-sized firm in Cincinnati. His days were filled with spreadsheets, quarterly reports, and meetings that all seemed to blend into one. Retirement was always someday, a concept in the distance that never felt real. But on his 60th birthday, something shifted. It wasn't the party his wife Jennifer had thrown for him, or the well wishes from his 3 grown kids. It was the silence afterward that got to him, the calm after decades of motion. He sat alone that night in the backyard, sipping tea and staring at the stars, wondering what came next. Jonathan had always thought the best part of his life was behind him. His youthful years, his career peak, the growing up years with his children. But something deep in his spirit disagreed. He didn't know it yet, but he was stepping into a chapter more radiant, fulfilling, and liberating than any he'd lived before. The first change came subtly. For the first time in decades, Jonathan began waking up without an alarm clock. Not because he was oversleeping, but because he didn't need to wake up for work anymore. He had time. Time to sit with his thoughts, time to read the news without rushing, time to talk to Jennifer over coffee like they hadn't done since their 20s. But even more interestingly, his mind started to buzz with clarity and purpose. He had always been a thinker, but now he was thinking about himself, what he wanted, who he truly was beneath the job titles and responsibilities. One morning, he opened his old sketchpad from college, untouched since his business school days, and began to draw. That first pencil stroke felt like a reunion with his soul. As he allowed himself to lean into the quiet, Jonathan noticed something unusual. He no longer felt a need to prove anything. For most of his life, he'd lived in comparison, competing for promotions, seeking recognition, measuring his worth by productivity. But now it seemed trivial. His sense of self-worth no longer came from validation, but from within. He didn't need to impress anyone anymore. That freedom became his second awakening. Jennifer noticed it too. Her husband had softened in the best way. He listened more. He laughed more. He started gardening. He even cried during a documentary they watched together, a moment she found deeply beautiful. "You're becoming more you," she told him one evening, placing her hand over his. "And I love this version just as much." He began spending afternoons at the local community center, not as a participant, but as a volunteer art instructor. He didn't do it for money, and he didn't even advertise his background. He just wanted to share the joy of creativity. To his surprise, a group of teenagers began coming regularly to his class. They called him Mr. J, and often stayed after sessions to talk about life, school, fears, and dreams. He never lectured them. He listened. And through those conversations, Jonathan realized that wisdom wasn't just about what you knew, but how generously you could offer it. One particular student, a quiet boy named Marcus, reminded Jonathan of his younger self. Shy, intelligent, hesitant to believe in his own talent. Over the weeks, Jonathan watched him evolve. His lines became bolder, his presence more confident. On the last day of the season, Marcus handed Jonathan a small framed drawing, a peaceful forest scene with a golden sunrise. On the back he had written, "Thank you for helping me see the light again." Jonathan teared up. Not just because of Marcus' growth, but because it echoed what was happening inside him too. Jennifer also underwent her own golden transformation. She had once been a passionate writer before children and responsibilities took over. Inspired by Jonathan's journey, she began to write again. Short stories, poems, reflections. The two of them would sit together on the porch, side by side, working quietly on their own projects. It felt like a second honeymoon, not the kind with champagne and ocean views, but the kind that breathes in simplicity and exhales contentment. Their 3 children, now adults with lives of their own, noticed the change in their parents. "You guys look younger," their daughter Rachel said during a Sunday visit. "Happier too." Jonathan smiled. "We're not getting younger," he laughed, "but I think we're finally living on our own terms." The third sign of Jonathan's golden age arrived not through success or recognition, but through resilience. He received a health scare, nothing too serious, but enough to shake his foundation. In the past, he would have spiraled with anxiety, worried about every test result, feared the worst. But this time he faced it with grace. He leaned into meditation, started walking more, eating better. Not because a doctor told him to, but because he wanted to care for his body the way he was learning to care for his soul. Even more surprisingly, the fear didn't define him. In fact, it illuminated his life even more. He began to appreciate the sunrise in a new way. The smell of coffee, the sound of birds, the texture of soil on his fingers when gardening. Life became richer, not because everything was perfect, but because he had learned to see perfection in the ordinary. The final sign came in the form of letting go. Jonathan had spent decades chasing, building, striving. But now, he was learning the beauty of surrender. He let go of bitterness he once held toward a colleague who took credit for a project. He forgave his father, long gone, for the harsh childhood discipline. He reached out to an old friend he hadn't spoken to in years, and they had lunch like no time had passed. In those moments he felt lighter. Not younger but freer. He wrote in his journal one evening, "I used to think the golden years were a decline, a soft exit into irrelevance. But now I know they're an ascent, a rising into who you truly are, without masks, without pressure. A golden age isn't defined by age at all. It's defined by peace, purpose, and love." And so, Jonathan continued to live his days with quiet joy. Some were eventful, others were not. Some were filled with laughter, others with reflection. But every day was full, because he was present for all of it. Jennifer's writing flourished, even getting published in a local magazine. They began hosting weekend dinners with friends, where stories and laughter flowed late into the night. One evening, under the fading glow of a July sunset, their grandson climbed onto Jonathan's lap. "Grandpa, are you old?" the little boy asked innocently. Jonathan chuckled. "I'm golden," he replied, kissing his head. "That's even better." Because Jonathan had finally realized something so few understand until it's lived. Entering your golden age isn't about retirement, age, or slowing down. It's about awakening to your truest self. It's about recognizing that life doesn't end when your career does. It begins. And perhaps, just perhaps, the brightest parts of our story are written in the chapters we never expected to matter.